folks, good to see people now coming in. We're just playing some good old British rock and roll in the background. Moving on the Queen's Highway, looking like a streak of lightning. That is the normatively determined Chris Spedding, or Spedding, who had a hit with that back in 1975. And Chris Spedding was also the bloke in the Wombles who had the Gibson-shaped, the V-shaped Gibson guitar. How do I know all these small things like that? I don't know. Anyway, great song called Bikin by Chris Spedding, 1975. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Saturday. It's Scotland. It's 1 p.m. and it is a Force for Good's Saturday street stall, coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the great British city of Glasgow. Thank you for joining us on Facebook and on Twitter. And goodness me, what a busy week it's been. What a busy weekend it was last weekend. And what a lot to talk about. And to drop knowledge as we always do. Because this is the place where we stick it to the gnats daily, weekly, monthly and yearly until we make them see clearly that we're down with the capital A to the double FG, a force for good. It's the place where we've got it all figured out and there ain't nothing that we're worried about. And we want to share our thoughts with you today. And we're going to get straight into it. Today is Saturday and it is the annual Armed Forces Day. Now, Armed Forces Day is a day for us to remember and to respect the men and women of the British Armed Services who have served in the past and who are serving today. And normally Armed Forces Day would often be accompanied by various things happening throughout the length and breadth of the country, but not this year because of the COVID thing. Derek's watching. Thank you for coming in, Derek. Duncan's watching. Thanks for coming in. Davey's watching. Thanks for coming in. Somebody's asking, there any protests today? We're not aware of there being any protests today. But what there often was in Glasgow, in George Square, was a very good Armed Forces Day event. And this was going on for several years, right up until 2017 when it stopped. Now what this would be you go into George Square, there'd be all the armed services, they'd all have tents and they'd have little things going on to entertain the children and so on. And it was a really nice kind of event that would happen on a Saturday afternoon in the summer. And we really liked going along to it. And it was like a flag-waving event for our well, for everybody who supports the armed services, and especially for us unionist people who especially support the armed services, because we understand that many of the Scottish nationalists actually have a bad relationship. You know, they don't like the armed services. So it was certainly a day for unionism. And then in 2017 that stopped and we were no longer having these events. And we, as an organisation of Force for Good, we looked into that and we approached the authorities, the British Army here in Scotland, and we asked why the British Armed Forces Day was not happening anymore, and we got the response that it was due to resource cutbacks from the Ministry of Defence. In other words, it was a money-saving so-called venture to no longer have this family day in George Square for the British Armed Services. And that's just so short-sighted, it's beyond belief. Because if anything, it more than paid for itself in public relations. It was money well spent. It wasn't something that you should cut back. it was something that should be done more often, and we made that argument at the time. But this is a terrible thing about cutbacks. You know, people say we need to cut back on this, cut back on that, but what happens is you actually cut back on all the things that help to make Scotland British, such as an Armed Forces Day in George Square, which was a really, really good event. So we were very sorry to see that. And our message to Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, would be, if you want to help increase Britishness within Scotland, then make sure that you have things like Armed Forces Days. Make sure that you have these things that people can go along to and help to celebrate not just British institutions, but Scotland's place within the United Kingdom. So on Armed Forces Day next year, we would like to see us getting back to that, getting back to having a family fun day in George Square for Armed Forces Day. That's an important thing, and it's huge public relations, does extremely well for the British Armed Services, and it's something that can be done. It's like a physical thing that can be done. Not cut back, don't cut back on it, put more money into it, and improve the relations between Scots and our institutions, such as the armed forces. So that's the only thing I want to say about Armed Forces Day, except if you are an ex-serviceman or woman, or you are serving, then maximum respect to you from A Force for Good and from all our supporters. Roscoe is... Did I meet you last week, Roscoe? Is that your chap? You're a good chap. Good chap. Richard Tallis is quite right. They should look at reviving some of the Scottish regiments. That's also true, because that was back in the day when we had all these regiments. That really helped to increase the sense of Britishness among Scottish people. I remember when it was the Tories who basically got rid of them all a long time ago, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and the Defence Secretary, I think at the time, was Ian Lang, who's a Scotsman, and I wrote to him when I was a lot younger, and I said, that's a bad idea, because people will lose a sense of Britishness within Scotland if you get rid of institutions like that. I don't know if I got a response, but 25 years later, okay, the British government was doing, and this is like 3 years ago, they were doing one of these public conferences. How can we support the union? How can we bring the union closer together? And who was chairing it? Ian Lang. Okay. I thought, that's ironic, you know. I told you 25 years ago, 28 years ago maybe even. Don't do that. Don't get rid of the British regiments. But time moved on, he got rid of them, and then they're wondering, how do we keep the United Kingdom together? Anyway, one thing we can do to keep the United Kingdom together is to remain active on the streets. And we had a great event last Saturday. Craig's watching and Glyn is watching. Give them a wave back. We had a great event. We were in St Andrew Square in Edinburgh. There were around 40 of us, and there was a counter-protest at the other side of people who wanted to get rid of the Melville Monument, which is a monument to Henry Dundas, who was a great Scottish and British hero. As many of you will already know if you've been following our site, he was Home Secretary, he was Lord Advocate for Scotland, he was First Lord of the Admiralty, and he was Secretary for War, and in his capacity as Chief of the Royal Navy, he built up the Royal Navy to the point that it was able to defeat the French at the Battle of Trafalgar. Also in his capacity as Lord Advocate, he won the case in Scotland which established that slavery was illegal in Scotland. And he always was against slavery, but he knew he couldn't get it through the House of Lords without trying to do it gradually. So some people complain that he didn't do it fast enough, but the point is he couldn't have done it any quicker. Anyway, the cultural Philistines were wanting to take down his monument in their historical ignorance. And we rallied, as I say, around 40 people who came along and stood strong. And we gave 3 speeches on the day. The Dundas Declaration, which is our considered response to the desecration and defamation of our national forebears, our national heroes. We gave a speech on who was Henry Dundas, and we also gave a speech on Britain's war against the slave trade. And that was a really good piece of activism. I mean, we did extremely well there, and we did get 1 or 2 good reports in mainly the alternative media, because unfortunately the British Broadcasting Corporation ignored us entirely. They ignored us entirely. Jamie saying, all monuments to stay part of our heritage. Absolutely. Robert, give you a wave. Thank you. So, yeah, the BBC ignored us entirely in their online report. They didn't even mention, oh, at the corner of the square there was this group or anything like that. They just totally cut us out of the story. They just blanked us, which was completely wrong and unfair. And all they did was they repeated the talking points, the incorrect historical talking points of the opposition. So that was irritating. But what we did get was a very good report here in something called the Edinburgh Reporter, which is online. And they quoted myself. I'm just going to read it because the words are still very good. On the north side of the garden, a force for good gathered. Mr. McConnachie told the Edinburgh Reporter that the reason for being there was very simple. He said, quote, "We believe that the UK is a moral as much as a political concept. So we do not like our history or institutions or forebears being smeared, especially not wrongly and falsely, as this gentleman at the top of this 150-foot high column is. Unfortunately and unwittingly, he is being smeared by many of the people over there on the other side of the square who don't actually understand his proper history. We're here to speak for him, to remember him, and to esteem his memory. We are also here to help give the other side over there a history lesson and help them appreciate just what a great country the United Kingdom is. It's not a good idea to go through life with a negative attitude, thinking that the past is all wrong. The United Kingdom is a fantastic place for everybody, regardless of race, colour or creed. No need to concentrate on the negatives. We are talking up the positives and how our United Kingdom is a force for good. And that was a quote in full by the Edinburgh Reporter. And so we were so pleased to see our message there and summarised. And good for that. And I thank all the folk who came out. There's somebody says, are the National Trust or Historic Environment Scotland doing enough to protect our heritage? That's a very good point. Do you know, and in England, what's Historic England saying about these statues being vandalised? What's the equivalent up here in Scotland saying? Nothing is the answer. They're not saying anything. Well, that's not quite correct. The chairman, Neil Oliver, is saying a lot, and he's saying it very well up here. We're so glad that we've got him to speak. But certainly, most of these government quangos are just going to go along with the politically correct point of view. And if they say the politically correct point of view is to tear down Buckingham Palace, these quangos would just go along with that because they're all on huge salaries and they all depend upon government patronage. And if Nicola Sturgeon is saying that has to come down or that's wrong, they'll just follow that, you know. They will, unfortunately. So they're not saying enough. And I would like them to grow a backbone. But as we know at the moment, the entire establishment is under the thumb of this religion, basically, of so-called equality, which I'll get to later on in this broadcast. But if you want to see our speeches and what we said, then please go to aforceforgood.uk/blog, and you'll see our speeches there, and the full text of them is given. We've seen nothing yet, says El Paso from the Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, what we have seen, I think, is a little bit disturbing anyway, whatever his sorts of fangled point of view on it is. James sending us some flags there. Carson and Paul, thanks very much for doing that. Aye, but here's something that I do want to say, right, about that event that we had. Cheryl saying they aren't clever enough for a history lesson. Some of them are only there to cause riots. That's true. There are some, though, who are innocent and who are being led by Pied Pipers, and it's to them that we do try to direct our message, because these are kind of people between the ages of 18 and 23, and when you think what ourselves were like between the ages of 18 and 23, we were maybe some of us were vulnerable to being misled, perhaps. So if we can tell the truth to these younger people, then that's a job well done. And we certainly wouldn't write them off. Many of them are quite intelligent. They're just being misled, I think, is the concern. So here's something I want to say, and I just, again, thanking the people who came out, because, you know, the people who were standing with us, they weren't people from the new town in Edinburgh, okay? The new town in Edinburgh is a very wealthy area. A lot of people there got money. But where were they standing with us? They weren't standing with us, okay? So do they not care? That's what I have to wonder. Do they not care about what's literally outside their window, okay? And people will say, oh, the country hasn't woken up yet. Believe me, the country has woken up. It's just that nobody wants to get out of bed. And that's always the case. People can see what's going on, but do they want to get out of bed? Do they want to do something about it? And that's the crunch. And most people, understandably, are not going to, for various reasons, even if they want to. So there's only a very small number of people who will actually do stuff. And they tend to coalesce around activist groups like ourselves, and we are so grateful for them, whoever they may be, whatever age they are, wherever they come from. If you stand with us, we thank you, because we know that most people don't, most people won't, most people can't. And so we have to say thank you very much to all of these people. And we are not going to hear them being smeared. And this is what really annoys me as well. You know, the philosopher Goethe, which is actually spelled Goethe, he said that conscience is the virtue of the observer and not the agent of action. And that's 100% correct. If you're sitting back observing, you can think up a million reasons why you're not going to get involved. But when you're actually on the street doing stuff, those considerations have to be put to the side, because that's the real battlefield of life, as it were. So conscience is the virtue of the observer and not the agent of action. And we've always known that from a very young age. And we're going to add another one here, basically, is that this is an AFFG phrase. If you're doing nothing, don't condemn people who are doing something. If you're doing nothing, don't condemn people who are doing something. And I've got ants in my pants about this, because everybody is condemning statue protectors for being, I mean, Boris Johnson called them bother boys, okay? Well, I didn't see Boris Johnson getting out there and defending the statue. It's literally a few yards from his front door. Why wasn't he out standing in front of the Winston Churchill statue with a megaphone? If he had done that, I'm quite sure he would have got lots of other people to come along. So if the only people who are going to defend Winston Churchill are what you, Mr. Johnston, refer to as bother boys, then that's shameful for you to call them that. Absolutely shameful for you to call them that, because they're doing something and others are doing nothing. So don't condemn people who are doing something when you're doing nothing. That's my message to politicians, and of all parties, especially here in Scotland. We've even got Tories condemning people. You know, back on Sunday the 14th was a great day in Glasgow history, because on Sunday the 14th of June, we were there, we had our cameras, and we reported it. There was a group of people who were going to tear down the Robert Peel statue. They were going to tear it down because he invented the modern Tory party, and also because he invented the police. That's enough, apparently, to tear a statue down. And they were bragging about this because they thought that they could do it. And they even put out a message here, the group that was going to do it. They said, "We will be following the tactics of Bristol, having lots of people. They can't arrest us all. And with the new administration of Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Government not wanting to look bad, this can go ahead." In other words, they didn't think there was going to be any opposition. Well, they thought wrong, okay? Because the 2014 referendum has changed Scotland forever. Prior to that, they could have perhaps got away with it because the rest of us would have still been in bed. But after 2014, enough of us have got out of bed and have started to realise that we're under attack, and we're not going to put up with it. So what then happened was, as those of you who will have seen our amazing videos happened, is that there was hundreds of people went into George Square to defend the statues, to defend the cenotaph, and to defend all the statues, which were all vulnerable, believe me. I mean, even the Robert Burns statue is vulnerable, as we said on the day, because he did a unionist poem and because he accepted a job to work on a slave plantation back in the 1780s. He never went over, thankfully. He stayed here and he wrote poetry, but he was going to be a slave master on a plantation over in the Caribbean. So that's surely enough to take his statue down, following their logic. There, Karen's watching. Give you a wave, Karen. So all these statues are vulnerable, but thankfully hundreds of people stood up and they made sure that the opposition couldn't come anywhere near the square. And of course, the next day, or that evening, Nicola Sturgeon was raging. The so-called Justice Secretary was raging about these people in George Square, oh, this, that, and the next thing. You can imagine what they were being called. But that was just their anger. That was just Humza Yousaf and Nicola Sturgeon's anger that the statues hadn't been taken down, and that Glasgow people had stood up and defended it. And what a great day in Glasgow history. And that will go down Sunday the 14th of June, the day that Glasgow stood up to defend its statues. And as I say, the statue destroyers didn't get anywhere near the square, which was really, really quite remarkable. And it was really, really something to see. And our viewing figures, our videos on Facebook, hit 500,000 views. 500,000 views! And reached 1 million people. So that is that's absolutely excellent stuff. And also absolutely fair play to Police Scotland, who kept the two sides apart. And in that regard, Police Scotland have been doing a lot better than some of these English forces, which are just a joke. I mean, some of the English forces have almost just been facilitating the rioting. So Police Scotland has really done well in protecting these statues and also keeping the sides apart. John says, "Keep up the good work, bro. Thanks." May says, "Thank you for all you do." Cheryl says, "What is shocking in London is they had to box up Winston Churchill." Absolutely. Our government is being ruled by the mob. Totally. They shouldn't have boxed up Winston Churchill. If they should have just made sure it was protected, and if it got damaged, well, that's a reflection upon the rioters, and that's a reflection upon the rioters' cause and what they stand for. So you should have just let him stand freely. As a man, he would have been there in real life standing freely. So just let him stand freely and protect it. And if it gets damaged, that's the reflection on the other side, that they have to take that. Nicholas says, thank you, save our statues. Totally, totally. So, what a great day that was. And we noticed talking about the English police yesterday, there was some statue destroying a rally in Sunderland, and the Northumbria police actually put out a Section 14 order preventing any counter-protests to it, which is not what police should do. Police, as they've done here in Scotland quite correctly, is the police enable counter-protests, and they enable the protest, and they stand in the middle, and they make sure that it's peaceful. That's the job of the police. The job of the police is not to suppress one side in favour of the other. And I would like Northumbria Police to perhaps understand that fact. Okay, they're not there to promote ideology, one side's ideology. They're there to ensure that both sides of the argument get their point heard. And to do so peacefully, of course, because there's no right to riotous assembly, but there is a right to peaceful assembly. And long may that continue. And it would be good if we could see the Home Secretary ensure that the police, specifically in England, understand that fact, okay? That they understand that fact, because it could be forgotten. It could be forgotten. The more you don't behave in a certain way, then the old ways get forgotten about. So we may get to a position in England where the police actually think their job is to facilitate, you know, the statue destroyers and to suppress the so-called others, the statue protectors. As chap saying there that they need to stop calling us protesters and we are protectors and patriots. Absolutely, protectors and patriots. Richard's saying the police have been used to being politicised over the last 30 years, sadly. Yes, that's a case in some cases. But I just want to give a shout out to one man who does deserve credit here, and I read this in a report in the Daily Record on the 20th of June. That was just on Saturday. And it's Jim McHarg, who is the Grand Master of the Orange Lodge. And he said, he described the statue protectors as, quote, proud patriots and unionists. And this is what I like, he said, I will not be condemning any of those who are trying to do their patriotic duty in defending these statues because they believe in this nation. There you go. See, that's all you have to do. You just have to say that, and then the other side think, oh, crikey, you know, that guy's not fooling about. We'll just move on to the next person that we can try to persuade or try to bully. David, hello, my brother, good man. Peter, as a Scotsman living in England, I was so proud to see Glasgow protect the statues. Nicholas, some police are a sham. They rolled on their backs thinking they would get their bellies tickled, but got kicked in the teeth instead. That's what happens. Robert's watching, good man. Aye. So you just need to say, look, we're not fooling about, and the other side don't smell weakness. When they smell weakness, then they'll just keep pushing and keep pushing. And that's always the case on everything, on every political issue. You just need to have your own opinion and stand by it, and not make sure you don't accept any of their false premises, because once you start accepting false premises or half agreeing with something that's not really correct, then they've got you. And they can just build upon that and keep pushing you their way. Aye, so thank you to everybody who came out, and to the people in Edinburgh, the super rich people in Edinburgh. Okay, if you don't want to come out and protect your Edinburgh heritage, then at least support the people who are defending the heritage and who are socially in a position to do so, such as A Force for Good and those of us who coalesce around us. And you can go to aforceforgood.uk/donate to, if you want to chuck in something there just to say thanks. And we've also got an amazing little badge here. our AFFG flag badge, which is this flag in the background, and that's on our shop. Go to aforceforgood.uk and click on shop at the top, and you'll see that wee badge. It's a bestseller. People are loving it. Teresa says, Happy Forces Day. Robert says, afternoon, Alistair. Good. If you've got, give us a wave. If you've got a comment, or if you've got any questions, please do send them in. We want to hear from you, and we want to give you a mention as well. Aye, so we just don't like people who are attacking our British patriots and statue protectors with nasty terms, especially when they're doing nothing. You know, if you're doing nothing, don't condemn people who are doing something, and don't wait for perfection. Don't think someday I'll get behind a movement where it's all just like totally lovely, respectable people who have, you know, butter wouldn't melt in the mouth or something like that, because that's never going to happen, and that's not the way you defend statues anyway. You need to have the kind of men and women that are standing up and standing strong for these things, and they need to be supported in whatever way, shape or form, and people who attack them just need to be blanked. Yes, we're constantly knocking this out the park, by the way. We really are knocking it out the park. And we here at A Force for Good, we believe in maintaining the UK Union. We believe in British independence. We're respecting our institutions, learning our history, teaching our history, protecting our built heritage, which is what statues and monuments are, and standing up for these things on the streets. And if you believe in those things also, then please do help us. You can go to aforceforgood.uk/support, put in your name and your email, and we'll get in contact with you and start to develop a relationship that way. Why do you think our opposition in Scotland is so poor? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Nicholas says, keep up the good work. People will only accept so much, says Peter. Well, do you know, I know people say that, but I don't believe that. I think that people will just accept things because most people are not doing anything, and there's never going to come a time when people are going to say this is it and no more. That's never going to happen. That's not the way that the world works. The way that the world works is that a tiny minority of revolutionaries try to create change. And you can have 99% of the people will be against that change, but unless they are organised and led, then they will lose. Because an organised minority will always beat a disorganised majority. That's the lesson of history. So I always use the example, you know, what if revolutionaries, a small number of them, tried to, you know, invade Buckingham Palace? How would you stop that? Okay, say if you didn't have police or army, we couldn't. How would we stop that? We would need to have people in London organised and led to stop it. And so unless they're there and unless they're organising and being led, they're going to lose. And we see that today with these statues. The majority of people in Britain oppose the statue destruction, but we're losing, or we could lose. We're organising now, thankfully, but we could lose because generally we're not organised or led. In your local town, for example, I'm sure you've got a cenotaph or statues that you like. If an organised minority starts to tear them down, who in your town is going to stop them? Okay, are you organising right now among friends and colleagues and interest groups to defend these statues? Because if you're not, you will lose them. An organised minority will always beat a disorganised majority. And so the lesson is we must organise and we must be led. And the best way of doing it at this moment is just in your local towns and villages, getting with people who will stand up for those things. So, and that could be a wide variety of people, but there'll only be a minority of people who want to actually do something. But if you can find that minority of people, then you can stand up for that statue. And what will then happen is the police will come between you and the protesters, and you'll probably end up protecting that statue as a consequence of that heavy police presence. So you must organise and locally to do these things, because otherwise you'll lose everything that you have. That's an important point. Thanks for raising that matter. But there's never going to come a time when somehow the majority is going to just wake up, get out of bed, and start somehow to be organised and led. That's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. You have to start organising now, and it will always be a minority versus a minority, and the great mass of people will just be looking on. Most of them not even knowing what's going on. That's not a litany of woe. That's actually a positive thing, which I've just said to you. It's a positive thing because it means that you, if you want to, can effect huge change. Don't leave it to anybody else, because if it's not you, then who is going to do it? Okay, who is going to do it? So you always, that's what I have to say there. And you have to be fearless, and you have to be sensible, and you have to work well. Margaret says, thank you for all you're doing in Scotland, with you all the way from a well-wisher and follower in north of England. Fantastic, Margaret, thank you. Peter, what... I don't understand what Peter's saying there. Obviously, Ireland has got a lot to do with Great Britain. It is part of the United Kingdom. A large part of it is part of the United Kingdom. So, where else are we going to go with this discussion? Yes, we've talked about people who attack the statue protectors because they're so snobbish, basically. Can't stand that. Cannot stand that. It's just nasty foolishness to attack statue protectors who are defending our country. Oof. When they're doing nothing, you know. I could talk about this article, goodness me, which I read in the National. I read the National, so you don't have to, as we always say. Somebody called the Equalities Minister, Christina McKelvey. Do you know what? I don't even think I'm going to read this because her words are just so insipid and stupid and just like pathetic. If they come out of anybody's mouth, you have to have a word with yourself. Yeah, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. Robert, bring back a strong politician. None of this nonsense would be happening today. Frankie says, thank you. Protect our heritage for our children's sake. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, we need to talk up our United Kingdom. And I saw this really good article from a writer who's not always writing good stuff, but sometimes he writes amazingly good stuff. Ronnie's saying hello. Scott's saying hello. We need... Yeah, Daniel Hannon, who said, it has become a commonplace to say that Britain has delusions of grandeur. Well, there's only a certain sort of person that says that. And they've always tried to say that in order to make the rest of us feel small. And but as Hannon points out here, if anything, the reverse is true. We are by any measure one of the world's top 5 powers. Of course, we have the best legal and financial services, the most professional armed forces, which is worth remembering today on Armed Forces Day. We're one of 8 nuclear states and one of 5 permanent UN Security Council members. We're home to the global language, which is English. No comparable nation moans about its decline. The disorder on our streets these past few weeks, the attacks on statues, the claims that Britain has an especially shameful past, serve to demoralise and demotivate, absolutely. And a nation that lacks self-belief is lost. That's right, and it was another Alexandra Solzhenitsyn quote here for you. To destroy a people, you must sever first their roots. To destroy a people, you must first sever their roots. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Peter, the reason the Irish flag is flying is because there's no red hand of Ulster flag on the emojis yet. So I think people use that flag maybe. But it's good, yeah, it's true, it could be confused with the Republic, absolutely. Yes, so that's what's happening, is when people are attacking the statues, they're trying to sever our roots. So we have to remember the country we're from. We are the country that developed and exported the idea that laws should not be passed, nor taxes raised, except by elected representatives. We taught the world the rule of law. We were not just early in ending slavery. We were unique in pouring resources into stamping it out globally. And we defeated the Nazi and Soviet tyrannies and liberated hundreds of millions of people. Ours is a stirring and ancient song, but it is not yet sung. That's true, it's not yet been sung properly. And talking about the fight against slavery, when we were at St Andrew Square last week, we concluded by saying that what we need here in Scotland is a statue or a monument to the sailors of the British Royal Navy who lost their lives throughout the course of the 19th century enforcing the slavery bans in the British Empire. In 1807, the British Parliament passed the Slave Trade Act, which prevented the trade in slaves, and then in 1833 they passed the Slavery Abolition Act, which prevented the practice of slavery in the British Empire, which was the area that we could police and patrol. And of course, at that time, that was a very big area that we could police and patrol. So many sailors lost their lives, some of them Africans as well, who were sailing with the Royal Navy. And so they should all, those sailors of the Royal Navy should all be remembered. Andrew's watching, give him a wave there. And so we've said that, and we're going to keep pushing that idea that we should have a statue or a monument in Scotland to remember the sailors of the Royal Navy who perished enforcing the slavery abolition bans. Peter says, Northern Ireland is British. Absolutely, 1000% it is, and long may that continue. So I'm not going to talk much about... well, we had that terrible tragedy in Glasgow yesterday, and Nicola Sturgeon says that it should remind us of what unites us, not what divides us. Well, I thought about that, and I thought, well, what does it remind us of? I think we are all united in that great human truth that we all prefer not to be stabbed rather than to be stabbed. So I think we can unite around that. I think we can unite around a common human desire not to be stabbed. I think that's something that unites us. But beyond that, I don't really know what she was getting at. What she was getting at, of course, is just like try to forget that that's happened, and let's just concentrate on other things. About these terrible statues, what are they doing up there? Oh, take them down. Oh, that's apparently the issue of the day. So, what I'm going to talk about now is, this is our Saturday street stall. We've been out in the past 2 Saturdays broadcasting live. Richard says 1,500 sailors passed away. Yes, that's certainly true, at least that number in the fight against slavery. John says the next Scottish Parliament elections are going to be a crucial make or break situation for the unionist community. We're all aware of the problem. Every election, the unionists vote. Every election, so many unionists don't get out and vote. That's what we also need to see. There's so many SNP councillors who are basically Republicans in Central Belt, in areas where they should not have been elected, only because the unionist vote stayed at home. The unionist vote was apathetic. If we can get the unionist vote out, then we can see some change there. We can see some change. Nelson says British lives matter. That's certainly so. Yeah. Good point. We need to get the vote out. That's the important thing for unionists. Somebody on Twitter there makes a strong point, yeah. And somebody saying there, these are just guilt trip protests. That's true. That's true, and you should not be allowed. You should not allow yourself to be guilt tripped into anything. When somebody's trying to guilt trip you, they're trying to control you, and once you accept that guilt unnecessarily, then they've got you. So you have to see when you're just being played. Absolutely. And an awful lot of people are getting played these days, unfortunately. And my friend and I were having a talk about this. It's like, why is this it's almost like a religion? And I think it is like a replacement religion for some people. There's a desire, there's a human need to maybe repent, which is often it's a kind of natural thing in some ways as well. But if you don't go for your conventional religion, it gets replaced by these secular religions like equality and diversity, and let's all be sorry for, being white. So there's definitely some sort of secular replacement going on, secular religious replacement. While slavery brought misery in the short term, the descendants have benefited enormously. Well, that's so true. I remember reading a statistic that even back in the days of slavery, some of the slaves on certain areas in America had a better standard of living than the white people, the white working class people in Britain and in Europe. And I mentioned Robert Burns earlier, and I was reading an article written by some guy who was lamenting why was Burns in that part of his life, why didn't he really care about slaves? Why did he accept a job on a slave plantation? Didn't he know? Well, here's the thing. Back in 1786, I think it was, right? If you were a working class person in Ayrshire, all you cared about was keeping the cold away, staying warm, and making sure there was food on the table that night. You did not have the luxury of cutting yourself up about people that you'd never even seen a picture of somewhere on the other side of the world. That wasn't part of your consciousness. You were just trying to stay alive and keep your belly full, or keep your belly fed, not full, just get some food in you. And that was the situation for everybody who was working class in Ayrshire, which is to say, everybody, apart from perhaps one or two of the philanthropic types who lived in the big house at the top of the hill. Apart from them, everybody was just trying to survive. So you didn't have the luxury of caring or even thinking about people on the other side of the world who might be slaves when your life was pretty hard in itself. The only sort of people who cared about those sort of things were your aristocratic landed people like William Wilberforce and others who had money and comfort and who could sit and think about these things, and whose conscience would be troubled by these things because they had the opportunity to sit down and think about these things. The rest of us were just trying to stay alive back in those days, okay? And it was absurd to ask anybody to have sympathy for somebody on the other side of the world. So that's one of the reasons why Robert Burns wasn't caring about being a slave trader. Working on a slave plantation as a slave manager. Frankie says, very interesting watching this live. Good. Keep watching, Frankie. Frankie says, excellent video. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Aye. And that was, we're from Ayrshire ourselves, so we can talk with a certain amount of, justification on these matters. We know these things. Being somebody on Twitter there, the mainstream media needs a major overhaul. One of the things that you can do though is support alternative media, and so please do support our work. We have several platforms. We have our Facebook platform, which just recently hit 29,000. We've got our Twitter platform, which just hit 27,000. And if you're watching this on Twitter, please retweet this with a positive comment. And what we will do is then retweet that tweet to 27,000 people. So that's a way of getting your message out there. We've got our Instagram page, which has got 3,000 followers, which is the biggest pro-UK Instagram page in the world. And at this time, we're investigating a fourth platform, which, if we decide to go for it, we will keep you totally informed. But we're just building our platforms and building our message and getting it out there. And I want to thank everybody who's behind our Facebook page, behind our Twitter page, behind our Instagram page, because you do tremendous, tremendous work. Now, please do check out our little badge, A Force for Good, which is this badge here. This flag here, in badge form, selling very well. It's limited edition. Limited edition. Now, this week coming up in British history. Let me run through this briefly. Very interesting things. Tomorrow is the day that the planning for D-Day began, and not everybody will know this, but the D-Day was planned in a hotel in Largs on the west coast of Scotland, 28th of June 1943, at the Vanduara Hotel and at the Hollywood Hotel. That's where D-Day was planned, in Largs. And various people were there and made visits there, including Montgomery, Churchill and Eisenhower. And that planning began on the 28th of June. Also on the 28th of June, in 1960, there was a South Wales mining disaster called the Six Bells mining disaster, which killed 45 men. That was in 1960. On the 30th, Tower Bridge was opened, and what we like about Tower Bridge is that it was built by the same Glasgow company that built the Forth Rail Bridge. It was built by Sir William Arrow and his Dalmarnock Glasgow company. So the same man, Scotsman, built Tower Bridge in London as built the Forth Rail Bridge, which we like. On the 1st of July, of course, was the first day of the Somme, when almost 58,000 casualties of the British Army fell on that day. And particularly hit was the 36th Ulster Division, comprised of many members of the Ulster Volunteer Force, Royal Irish Fusiliers, Royal Irish Rifles and Royal Inniskillen Fusiliers. And of course the division also included officers and men from all over the United Kingdom. And it was the day that Billy McFadgen, the famous Ulsterman and VC recipient, perished under a grenade that he had fallen upon in order to defend his fellow soldiers. And we'll be remembering him also on the 1st of July. Let me tell you a story of honour and glory of a young Belfast soldier, McFadgen by name. For king and for country, young Billy died bravely and won the VC on the field of the Somme. Gone like the snowflake that melts on the river, and gone like the first rays of day's early dawn. Like the foam from the fountain, like the mist from the mountain, young Billy McFadgen's dear life has gone. The 1st of July is also Canada Day, which was the day that the British North American Act was passed in 1867, which united the colonies of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and the province of Canada into a single country called Canada within the British Empire. And the 2nd of July is an interesting thing that many of our viewers may know. There was 2nd of July 1937, there was another mining disaster. 30 miners were killed in a colliery near Stoke. And a few weeks earlier, the Stoke City Football Club chairman, Sir Francis Joseph, had produced 30 friendship cups, which were commissioned to commemorate the coronation of George VI. And he presented them to the English First Division clubs. But after the Holditch mining tragedy, and in order to raise funds for the relief effort, he organised a game between Stoke City and Rangers, who were the Scottish champions at the time. And that game was on the 19th of October, and Rangers went down and played Stoke City, and it was a 0-0 draw, but they were presented with one of these friendship cups, which is called a loving cup. And they were presented with it by Sir Francis Joseph, who said, you can have this, provided that in perpetuity you toast the reigning monarch prior to the club's first home match of the year. And that ceremony is still performed today. It's the Rangers Loving Cup ceremony, and it's performed with the directors of the visiting team present. So that's a nice little bit of British history, which came out of the tragedy, the mining tragedy, on the 2nd of July 1937 near Stoke. Folks, please go to aforceforgood.uk/support, put in your name and address, and we'll keep in contact with you that way, and you'll get our regular email updates. If you think you've got value from what we do, please go to aforceforgood.uk/donate to, and just chip in something, whatever you can afford, a £5 or a £10 or more, but we will use that. We run very frugally, as you know, and we create great stuff on very little, and we are fearless and we are indefatigable. We're not slowing down. There's nothing that's going to stop us doing what we're doing. You know, you can trust us to do good work. We've been on the scene since the 21st of March 2012. We are going to be here, God willing, in perpetuity. We'll be standing up for the United Kingdom, standing up for British independence, standing up for our built heritage, teaching about British history, teaching about our precious inheritance, and standing up on the street for these values. And we'll be doing so in a sensible and a proper and a good way. And we're here, and there's nobody else like us around, and nobody else is going to come around. So if you can help us, please do so. We especially rely upon people who donate monthly. And you can donate from like £1.15 a week, which works out at £5 a month, okay? But we rely upon those union supporters. So if you go to aforceforgood.uk/union-supporters, and you can donate monthly to us that way. Robert's watching. Give him another wave. Another Robert is watching as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our broadcast for this week. It just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom, and God save the Queen. Thanks for watching.